Welcome to The Road. This is a weekly podcast of All Saints Lutheran Church. I'm your host, John Pedersen, and I serve as pastor. Each week, we reflect on faith, life, and navigating the road ahead. The language of journey is common when we think about life. It has its joys and challenges along the way, and we all need a little encouragement and guidance at times to keep us going. There's a word in the Bible, asphalia, which means truth, but it's the same root word we use in English for asphalt, if you can believe that. It's a solid surface that makes travel easier and more assured. And so every week we're going to be exploring elements of faith and life that keep us on the road. Faith isn't about living a perfect life. It's about finding our way, getting through rough spots, but seeking out those great vistas too. You can find my weekly message here, but you'll also find special conversations with guests who have insights on things like wellness, parenting, and living with unique purpose. If you appreciate this podcast, remember to subscribe where possible and share it with a friend. Here's this week's message. So just wanted to begin by saying that I got my first shingles vaccination shot this past week. And I tend to have strong reactions to vaccinations within the expected side effects. And on Wednesday, I woke up and was just completely wiped out, had body aches, no energy to do anything. And spent most of the day in bed apart from needing to take my daughter to an appointment late in the afternoon, and I got home from that, went right back to bed, and slept through dinner. And then on Thursday, I woke up, and I just felt like a new man again. It was great. You know, you're always grateful when you feel renewed again. And if you're like me, when you're stuck in bed and that tired, your whole spirit just kind of gets dragged down a little bit with it. You're not yourself, and in this case, I wasn't really sick, but it was a reminder of how healing can do more than just improve our physical health, but it impacts the totality of who we are. We're continuing with our series, Hope, and our topic today connects with the gospel reading we just heard from Mark 1, which prominently features healing. And at the outset, I just want to start by pointing out a storyline we might miss if we focus only on the details of the healings. And that's how Jesus himself develops personally over the course of this short passage. Jesus begins by healing one person, Simon's mother-in-law. And his demonstrated power then to heal draws this entire town. His workload starts to get out of control. In the morning, he needs to manage his own well-being, so while it's still dark, he goes to a deserted place to pray. But Mark says that Simon and his companions hunt him down, they track him, and they find him and tell him everyone is searching for him. And we presume that even more people need to be healed. But Jesus announces that it's time to move on to other towns. So what we see is this story of Jesus and what it takes to be a healer, what it takes out of you and what you need to do to take care of yourself, even if you're Jesus. I've just been impressed and grateful during my time at All Saints for all those who work in healing professions, including medical professionals, but so many seek to serve and care for others in a variety of ways, which is what Jesus calls us to do, whatever our personal, community, or professional roles are. We have an example in Jesus of someone who cares about the well-being of people and who also tends to his own well-being along the way. I've seen a variety of research over time on how to find renewal and avoid burnout, and it's not only about getting away and taking time off, which is important, but it's also about maintaining and renewing a sense of purpose. In fact, you can keep vitality even when you're faced with challenge by staying focused on your purpose and your sense of calling. And we can see that happening with Jesus. He does get away for rest, but it's accompanied by prayer, which helps him restore his soul. And it's no surprise that after doing this, he has a new, clear sense of direction. He says, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns so that I may proclaim the message there also." So that's what I was called to do. That's what I came out to do. So if you've ever felt worn down and your hope has felt thin, it's an encouragement to find time away, but not only to unplug, reconnect with God. Have intentional conversations with others who care about you. If you feel like you're not great at prayer or reflection, check out our spiritual wellness page under the Be Well tab on our website. We have some resources there for you, including some suggested online devotionals, as well as some prayer and meditation apps for your device, which I've found super helpful over the years. They will guide you through prayer and faithful meditation and reflection. All Saints is here to support you as you seek greater well-being and healing, so reach out and let's be in conversation. I also want to briefly mention that if you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, you're not alone. All Saints is one of the supporting partners of Mental Health Connect, and Reverend Hannah Campbell Gustafson was here this last Tuesday at All Saints from Mental Health Connect to talk about mental health. And know that you can call a navigator who will help you identify next steps and do legwork to connect you with the best alternatives for your situation. It's an incredible resource, free and completely confidential. We have brochures at our Welcome Center if you want to know more. You can find links to their services under our emotional wellness page. And I just want to come back, though, and reflect on some other aspects of the story that we heard from Mark 1. The first thing I want us to think about is this very present reality in the story that sometimes we have to address what is unhealthy and destructive before healing is truly possible. And from a medical perspective, we get this. If there's a bacteria or there's cancer in your body, it often has to be removed before our bodies can fully heal and be restored. You can certainly address symptoms, but unless you get to the root cause, it's not going to fully heal. When Jesus heals Simon's mother-in-law, it represents a certain type of healing. Mark says that he took her by the hand and lifted her up from bed, and her fever was gone. No modern medical explanations here. We can't explain it in those terms, it just happens. But he does something that I would say is positive for her, and she gets better. It's a positive model for healing. The other model is what we see next as people start to flock to Simon's house. This story follows what we heard last week when Jesus casts out an unclean spirit from a man in the synagogue. And in that case, and in other cases in today's story, there's something kind of toxic in spirit has to be removed from people for them to be healed. It's kind of a more confrontational model. And I do want to note that there is a shift in language from the story that we heard last week involving the man with the unclean spirit. So many of the people Jesus is encountering now who Mark says were demon-possessed. And I'm always curious to know if there's any nuance or additional clarity that we can find in the original language. The Greek word for demon is daimonion. It is mostly commonly translated as demon or evil spirit, but it can also be translated as a heathen god or a deity. Doesn't really help us a lot in this circumstance or give us much additional insight. And there's no obvious explanation for the shift from the language of unclean spirit to demon. No clear indication that they're interchangeable terms either. So we just take the word Mark gives us. We hear that the whole city was gathered around the door, and he cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. And unlike the more gentle and compassionate healing of Simon's mother-in-law, we see, again, this more kind of almost confrontational quality to what he's doing now because he's preventing these spirits from speaking. Here and throughout Mark's gospel, we hear about Jesus silencing demons. Speech is a form of power, and preventing them from doing so curtails their power. They also apparently know who he is, and in that culture, knowing and speaking someone's name comes with a degree of power, positive or negative. So again, Jesus is keeping them from exercising any power over him and those that he's seeking to heal. This also leads into a much wider phenomenon in Mark's gospel in which he frequently tells people who call him the Messiah not to tell anyone about it, including his disciples in some cases, like we'll see next week in the Transfiguration. This is a phenomenon that scholars have noticed and referred to as the messianic secret. I'll say a bit more next week, but it's not reflective of Jesus ultimately trying to hide who he is, but an attempt to manage the exponential growth of his ministry, to let his ministry ultimately speak for itself, and to keep his inevitable confrontation with religious and Roman leaders at bay for as long as possible so he can complete his mission. Again, after he slips away by himself, the disciples are hunting for him. They're tracking him. Everything about the reaction to the ministry he's now embarked upon is very sudden, almost aggressive and relentless, even when it's a kind of positive response. Already he can't escape it, but he has to keep moving to complete what he came to do, to proclaim the good news throughout the region. When true hope comes, the thirst and desire for it is universal and seemingly unending, and I think it's remarkable in passages like this how much of his work relates to healing. Teaching and healing and casting out demons all seems to flow together in Mark's description of his ministry. The spiritual dimension of this story is kind of hard for us to process. Probably a lot of us are uncomfortable with that terminology around demons. But even today, we do talk at times about evil or perhaps toxic systems that stand in the way of personal or social healing. Sometimes individuals can have toxic belief systems or relational patterns that are destructive. We may talk about inner demons as perhaps unresolved attitudes or mental patterns that are destructive to us and sometimes others. We see that in people who become almost possessed by ideologies like white supremacy, which led a young man in 2015 to kill 9 people at a prayer meeting in Charleston, South Carolina. His hope was to start a race war. It was a diabolical vision that ended the lives of those at Mother Emanuel AME Church. The gospel was crowded out and had no room to take root in his heart, mind, or spirit. The evils we see and think about today may not line up exactly with what Jesus is doing in today's gospel, but it might help us relate to it better and consider how we're called to center our lives in the message of good news that Jesus shares above all else. In some cases, we cannot truly live and experience the gospel until we've been healed, until other ideologies or inner demons or whatever stands in the way of hearing the love and grace of Jesus is set aside or driven out, both for our sake and for the sake of others and the world. At All Saints, we know that the well-being of our soul is connected to our emotional, physical, intellectual, and financial well-being, and all of that is tied to the well-being and health of our relationships and broader society. When we pay attention to one or more of those areas, it can positively bring healing and improvements through the rest of our bodies and community. The power of the good news unleashes hope to make all things new and for God's love to be shared with all. And that hope is yours today. May you rest in God's unchanging love for the world, for all your neighbors, and for you. And may you live in a way that allows that message to be shared beyond these doors, bringing healing to a world in need. Amen. That's this week's message. You don't have to navigate the road ahead alone. You can join with others at All Saints. Visit allsaintsmtka.org for more information. Have a great week.